The Language of Music Introduction to Theory, Week 2. What makes things major and minor? This is a synopsis video from Week 2 of the short course I'm running called The Language of Music. In Week 1 we talked about semitones and tones, the smallest atoms that we use in Western music to discuss harmony and melody. And we introduced the note names of the white notes. We transplanted that into the C major scale. Then we started to look at how we can use numbers to discuss interval relationships. We kind of discussed the whole concept of intervals, what they are, how they are gaps between notes, and how we can look at breaking down complex ideas about music into these smaller chunks called intervals. If you'd like to see a recap of Week 1, there'll be a link below this video. And I would recommend watching that before you watch this one so that the concepts are familiar. This class was originally given on Zoom to a group of people. I'm going to summarise the ideas and the concepts here into a shorter, more condensed video using the same resources. We began this class by looking at the black and white kind of monochrome puzzle of the keyboard and starting to find our way around it a little bit more by adding some note names and colours. So you can see here we've got A to A of the white notes, which sounds like this. So if we add the note names of the white notes, we have A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A. The concept we're going to talk about this week is sharps and flats. We have a span of white notes here, and sharps sit above those white notes. They're the black notes that sit above them. Flats sit below the note. So sharps and flats don't really exist on their own. They are an entity that's always attached to a note. You don't just get a sharp hanging out on its own. It will be the sharp of something or the flat of something. And this is where we revisit our idea of tones and semitones, because in order to understand a sharp and flat relationship, we need to be familiar with what a semitone sounds like, or what a semitone relationship is. So in our last session, in Week 1, we understood the idea that B to C, those two white notes you can see, and E to F, another pair of neighbouring white notes, are semitones. And if we understand that, and we learn how those sound, we need to hold that relationship in memory of what a semitone sounds like. And if we start to apply this to sharps and flats, then what you actually have is a whole run of semitones. That's what the notes are, because there's not really 7 notes in the scale, there's actually 12. 7 white notes and 5 black notes. So the whole 12 note scale actually sounds like this. All of those notes are a semitone apart. White note to black note to white note to white note to black note to white note to black note to white note to white note to black note to white note to black note to white note. They're all semitones. So now if we come to think about sharps, we can assign a name to all of those black notes. So you can see on the screen we've got A to A sharp. The one that sits between the blue and the pink, that's an A sharp. And then above C, we have C sharp. Above D, D sharp. Above F, F sharp. Above G, G sharp. And above A sharp. I would encourage you to find a way to make that semitone relationship feel familiar in your ear, whether it's singing it or playing it on an instrument. La, la. And to understand that that's a relationship that transfers into different places up and down the scale. I just played D to D sharp. La, la. Those were some examples of how we can change the pitch of the white notes by raising them a semitone and sharpening them. The same idea applies to flats, except this time we're lowering the pitch of the white note by a semitone. What you can see on your screen now is the same keyboard with the same white notes and the same black notes, but this time we're looking at the black notes through the lens of the flat, thinking about how we can lower the pitch of the white notes. So as the sharps sat above the white notes, this time the flats sit below the white notes, so we've got a new set of names. So whereas before we had A to A sharp, we went up, this time we're going to come down from B, which is a tone above A, to that same black note, but it's now B flat. So this note is both A sharp and B flat. And looking up the rest of the scale, we have D and D flat sitting below it, E with E flat sitting below it, G with G flat sitting below it, A with A flat. We're going to put some of this into context now by thinking about how things become major and how they become minor. This process of sharpening or flattening notes is very crucial to how we understand what those processes are when we talk about something being major or minor. We discussed in week 1 that there is a pattern of intervals that's common to every major scale, which is transferable across different keys, across different starting notes. This means that we're able to break down the concept of what a major scale is into some recognisable shapes. So we're going to come to the C major scale because it is the one we looked at last week, firstly, and also because it's the one that just uses white notes, so it's quite easy to look at the shapes that it makes. The C major scale starts on C, and we're going to go up 1 octave to the C above. If we break that down for a second into whether we're jumping up a tone or a semitone with each step, we'll be able to look at the pattern that creates what we call the major scale. So first up, moving from C to D, that's a tone. Moving from D to E, that's a tone. E to F is a semitone. F to G is a tone. G to A is a tone. A to B is a tone. B to C is a semitone. So we have tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone. I'll say that one more time. We have tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone. And what I'm counting there is the gaps between the notes. It's how big a jump there is before we get to the next note that makes up the major scale. And this is transferable to other keys. So for example, I'm going to play a G major scale, which sounds like this. G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G. And that followed the same pattern of G to A is a tone, A to B is a tone, B to C is a semitone, C to D is a tone, D to E is a tone, E to F sharp is a tone, F sharp to G is a semitone. And we've arrived back at the octave. That's the defining relationship for the major scale, those tones and semitones. If you haven't done it already, it would be helpful perhaps to sketch out a keyboard like the one that you can see on the screen, and then you can count up those relationships yourself, just with your fingers, tone, tone, semitone, etc., and start to get used to those relationships. And maybe sing it as well. It can be really helpful to get this into your own voice. Because we're now going to move on to the defining relationships that exist within a minor scale. And there are several different versions of the minor scale. There are also a number of different scales in general that are called the modes, and they are fascinating, but we're not going to talk about them today. What we're going to talk about is what we call the natural minor scale. Some of you might have come across the concept of the harmonic scale or the melodic scale, particularly if you learnt an instrument at school, because I know the harmonic and melodic minors are used within instrument grades. That's how I encountered them first. But we're actually looking at what we call the natural minor scale. And because we've been in C major, I'm going to look at its equivalent, C minor. So we're going to start on the C in the same way, and we're going to go to the octave above. And it sounds like this. I'll play that one more time with the note names this time. We've got C to D, D to E flat, E flat to F, F to G, G to A flat, A flat to B flat, B flat to C. Let's come back to the concept of tones and semitones and how far we're jumping up with each degree of the scale. C to D, that's a tone. And at this point you wouldn't be able to tell whether we're going into a major scale or a minor scale, because the major and minor scales both share that first tone jump. But here's where it becomes different to the major scale, because it's this relationship between the second note and the third note that tells us it's a minor scale. So I'm jumping a semitone from D to E flat. So at the beginning of the minor scale we have 1, 2, 3, whereas in the major scale we had 1, 2, 3. It's a big difference. So far we've had tone, semitone, then we have another tone, E flat to F, and then another tone, F to G, and then a semitone here, G to A flat, and then a tone here, A flat to B flat, and then another tone at the top, B flat to C. If I play the C minor scale followed by the C major scale, you'll hear the difference hopefully. So crucially in that minor scale we had the third note flattened and the sixth note and the seventh note both flattened, whereas in the major scale they weren't. And just like the major scale, this relationship can be transferred to other keys. So just as we looked at G major before, let's now have a look at G minor. In the G major scale, there was a B natural, an E natural, an F sharp in those crucial 3, 6 and 7 positions. Coming back to the G minor scale, a B flat, an E flat and an F natural before you get back up to the G. And that's a picture of the same pattern that we found in the C minor scale. And actually, if we come back to the very first picture where we attributed some note names to this keyboard, what we've actually got there on screen is the A natural minor scale. That follows the same pattern as well. Tone, semitone, tone, tone, semitone, tone, tone. So hopefully this explains a bit more about how we can find the difference between major and minor scales. If you need a bit more of a refresher on how we think about notes as numbers, have a look back at last week's video where I explained some of these concepts a bit more fully, and you'll be able to familiarise yourself with those concepts, and then come back to this one just in case you need a bit more time to spend with the whole notes as numbers thing. The final concept that I want to touch on really briefly is this idea of relative majors and minors. So some of you might have come across this concept before, but don't worry if you haven't. We're just going to have a brief look at it. And we're going to come back to this A minor scale that we've just spent some time with. It uses exactly the same notes as the C major scale. And it's because they use the same notes but start on different places in the scale that we talk about them as being relatives. And a helpful way to think about relative majors and minors is that if you play a major scale up to its sixth note, so in this case we're going to start on C and go up to A, that will be the starting note of a minor scale that uses the same notes as the major one. It's relative to the major one. So if we start a C major scale on its sixth note of A, so we're going to use just the white notes, we have an A minor scale. And similarly, if we start playing a minor scale and come to a third note, that will be the note that we start the relative major scale on. So we've come back to C. I will touch on this in more detail in further classes down the line, but that is just a brief introduction to how relative major and minor keys intersect with each other. So we had, first of all, we moved from C major to C minor. What's called the tonic major or the tonic minor. And those crucial intervals of the third, sixth and seventh notes being flattened. And then we had a little look quickly at the major scale and its relative minor, which starts on the sixth degree of the scale. Hopefully that helps to unpack a few of these concepts to do with major and minor, and to make those ideas a little bit more accessible by seeing them as the patterns that they are, breaking them down into smaller steps. If any of this is confusing, feel free to ping me a message on social media at Bethany Roberts Music on Facebook or bethany.m.roberts on Instagram, and I'm really happy to explain some of these concepts in further detail. I host a weekly session on Zoom, which anyone is welcome to attend. It's a pay-as-you-feel session, no barriers. If you can't afford anything, that's totally fine. I'll pop a little link below this video if anyone would like to send a few quid, but absolutely no pressure at all. If you'd like to know more about these sessions, head to my Facebook page, which is Bethany M. Roberts Music, where I will be sharing details of upcoming sessions and how you can get involved. Thanks for listening.